to see you here. This is our June E2E meeting. We hope that maybe we'll be in person by July or August. But in the interim, People's Bank of Commerce has been unbelievably generous and gracious with their time by both educating entrepreneurs in the Valley about the PPP loan program. And now, since guidance is starting to come out about forgiveness, we begged Julie to give us some of her precious time and expertise to just talk through what the loan forgiveness guidance looks like. And then if we have some time, we'll let folks ask questions. For now, if you have a question, would you please put it in the chat, and we'll go through them afterwards. Jim's really great at curating the chat, so we'll let him do that. Jim is going to record this call, just so you know. We've had several people say they couldn't make it, but they'd really like to see the recording, so we'll post that on the Facebook page, and Jim will probably send people a link as well afterwards, just in case something goes by really fast. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Julia Beattie, who's the Chief Lending Officer at People's Bank of Commerce. She has a unique background in that she has been an entrepreneur, has run a business, and she also comes from a banking family, and she has real depth of knowledge of banking, as well as tremendous empathy and experience with entrepreneurs and people who are trying to keep their businesses going. So Julia, thanks so much for being with us, and I will just turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Cynthia. It's a real pleasure to have the opportunity to visit with all of you again. And so I hope that what I share this evening will be helpful to you. It's going to be a balancing act between providing you with some good information, but without inundating you with too much detail. So I thought what I would do first is just give you a brief outline of my presentation. I hate to use that word presentation, but essentially when you're working with Zoom, it kind of becomes a presentation because it's not nearly the back and forth dialogue that you can have in person. So I thought I would sort of lay it out for you, and then you'll have an understanding of where I'm going to go, and it might help you in terms of as questions arise, whether or not they might be answered a little bit later on or not. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some current numbers, very, very briefly on that. And then I thought what I would do is do a quick review of the pertinent points as it relates to recipient funds of PPP loans, and then talk about some changes and revisions to what we initially understood it to look like and what it's looking like now. And then a PPP forgiveness process, big high-level overview. And then I'm going to drill down a little bit into that and talk about what are the borrower's responsibilities and what are the lender's responsibilities. And then I'm going to kind of wrap up with addressing what might be some of your bigger concerns. And I was thinking about that from the perspective of, if I were a recipient of a PPP loan, what might I be concerned about right now? So I really hope that that this will be informative for you. First, just to hit on some quick numbers, nationwide, there have been a bit more than 4.5 million PPP loans funded that total about $510 billion. So you can see the magnitude of this program nationwide. People's Bank is still accepting applications. So if you know of anyone in the community who has not yet applied, People's Bank is still accepting applications. As evidence of that, we funded 8 new PPP loans yesterday. And I checked our log, we funded 1 more today. And I believe with that one today, we tipped the scale at 900 funded loans. So, so I think that's pretty exciting. But most important takeaway there is when you're out and about, and then as you're listening to other business owners, if there's any needs out there, or if someone needs assistance, please direct them our way. So a review of the pertinent points of the PPP loan program. I'm sure some of this will be a review for you, but I still think it's worth hitting the highlights. You might recall that as a recipient of a PPP loan, you have had 8 weeks to use the funds from the date of disbursement of the loan. As well, to ensure full forgiveness, you had to use at least 75% of that for payroll costs and up to a maximum of 25% for other expenses that included interest on loans, rent expense, and utilities. And there was a caveat that kind of got buried in a lot of the narrative, but the caveat was that you had to maintain your full-time equivalent number of employees, and you had to, you were limited as to what you could do with regards to any wage or salary reductions. And then finally, if there was any amount of loan residual after forgiveness, that loan was going to be repaid in 2 years at an interest rate of 1%. The reason I go over those is because there have been some changes, and they've been to the positive for the benefit of the recipients. It just passed. This was called the Paycheck Protection Program Flexibility Act. And it was passed by the House last week, I believe. It was passed by the Senate just a couple hours ago. It's going to go to the White House for signature. I thought I would hit on some of the highlights that are some of the changes that are embedded in that act. First of all, the forgiveness period has been expanded, the period of time in which you needed to spend the funds has been expanded from 8 weeks to, I believe, 24 weeks. I just got the formal act a little bit ago, and I believe it was expanded to 24 weeks. That's a significant change. The second thing is that the requirement that 75% of the proceeds be used for payroll expenses, that was reduced to 60%. So there's a little bit more flexibility as to how the funds are being used. Another notable change is that the sunset period for the PPP program was going to be June the 30th, and that has been extended to December the 31st, 2020. Another real interesting change, I find this interesting because it's not going to, as it currently stands, affect existing PPP recipients, but going forward, new PPP recipients, that repayment of any residual that's not forgiven is going to be, the amortization period is going to be 5 years instead of 18 months. So, so anyway, those are some of the highlights of some of the recent changes. We have in the last week or two received 2 primary pieces of guidance. One of those, one of the key takeaways is that as it related to payroll costs, as an example, there was a lot of concern early on about payroll costs that were paid or incurred, or what exactly was the verb used that would qualify during that 8-week period, which now has been extended. Payroll costs, they've opened it up, they've become much more lenient, and payroll costs can be any payroll paid plus any payroll incurred during an 8-week period. Furthermore, that period has been extended, as I already discussed. So significant changes to the original program. Also, there's a safe harbor period as it relates to your FTE count. One of the caveats that I mentioned before, that you had to maintain your FTE count. They've given an extension of that until June the 30th for restoration of your full-time equivalent count, should you have done a reduction in your employee force anytime after February 15th through April the 26th. They call it a safe harbor period. So on now to the PPP forgiveness process overview. This is at the 30,000-foot level. You, the PPP loan recipient, has to make application for forgiveness. The application that has been released by the SBA is a fairly onerous document. It's about 11 pages long. I'll go into it in a few minutes. but you have to complete that application and provide all the supporting documents that it calls for, which is on the very last page of the application. Upon receipt of the complete application, the lender then has 60 days to determine if the forgiveness is supported through what is provided in the application along with the supporting documentation. We have 60 days to make that determination. We then submit for forgiveness from the SBA, and the SBA then has 90 days to actually pay the forgiveness portion. And of course, that's going to come to the bank as a pay down on loan. So that again is about the 30,000 foot level. We'll go a little bit more into the borrower's responsibilities. I mentioned that you have to submit an application. I kind of am torn as to how much to tell you about this rather onerous application, because there's a shred of hope that the U.S. Treasury will prevail on the SBA to come up with a simpler application for loans under a certain dollar amount. We don't know that that's going to be the case. There are virtually all state banking organizations are lobbying for it. Other business support organizations are lobbying very hard for it, and we are just hugely hopeful that that will be the case. But with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about this application with you because I suspect some of you have heard about it, about how onerous it is, and I thought maybe I could just kind of break it down and make it a little bit more, seem a little bit more manageable to you. Essentially, the application is this. There's what I call a cover page, and the cover page shows your line item, payroll costs, your total. It shows your total for non-payroll, the 3 different categories that I mentioned earlier. And then it shows a line item for an adjustment if you had a reduction in your FTE, and another line item for a reduction should you have dropped wages. And then it ensures that at least 75% is payroll related, and that of course is going to change. And then finally at the very bottom is a forgiveness amount. And that's what I call the cover page. And that cover page then is supported by a document called a Schedule A. The Schedule A in turn is supported by a worksheet with tables within that worksheet where you actually do the itemization of all of your employees, what their payroll is, what their FTE is, was there a reduction in their wage, etc. So those tables feed into the Schedule A, and then the Schedule A feeds into what I call the cover page. In addition to those pages, there is a page of certifications that you, the borrower, will initial. And I'll be happy to go over those certifications. They're kind of in the same spirit of the certifications that you signed when you provided your application. And then there are several pages of instructions. So all in, it's 11 pages. It's called version 1 because we anticipate that it will be changed. Already it needs to be changed just in light of the change in the amount of the payroll expense going from a minimum of 75% to a minimum of 60%. So there will be changes in the application. The bigger hope, of course, is that there is an option for a much, much simpler application for loans under a certain dollar amount. In addition to that 11-page application, on the very last page of that package, there's a full page that lists documents that the borrower must submit in support of their application. And then there's a separate section that is documents that a borrower must maintain in the event they would be requested to provide those supporting documents. So just in the spirit of being fully informing, your responsibility back to this itemization of the borrower's responsibilities, yours is to provide a complete application, including the supporting documentation. Your other responsibility is to maintain other records that were used to complete the application. And there is also a retention period, but I need to verify that. No, just strike that. So now I'll move on to the lender's role in forgiveness. And this is kind of interesting because it's very, very similar again to the spirit of what our role was during the application process. Our role was not to challenge the validity of your numbers in the application process. Our role was to take the information you provided, and because you, the applicant, certified that it was accurate and correct, we took it at face value that it was accurate and correct. All we did was we made sure that it supported your loan amount. In other words, 2.5 times your payroll, that your payroll times 2.5 equaled your requested loan amount. And so the same holds true with this forgiveness piece. So I'm just going to kind of read my quick bullet points. Number 1, we confirm the completion of the borrower's application, including the certifications, where you specifically initial each line item to certify each line item. We confirm receipt of the documentation that the borrower must provide with the application. We have to confirm your calculations. We go in and we actually mathematically make sure that this number plus this number equaled this number, that your calculation of FTE shows that there is or isn't a reduction in FTE. And if there is, how does that impact forgiveness? Really, all we're doing is we're double checking your numbers. So what I wanted to do, I'm going to actually go right to the source document because it's one of the, what we call interim final rule, which is our guidance. And I'm going to read it so that you can, it kind of really drives home the point of what your responsibilities are versus ours as the lender. Providing an accurate calculation of the loan forgiveness amount is the responsibility of the borrower, and the borrower attests to the accuracy of its reported information and calculation on the loan forgiveness application. Lenders are expected to perform a good faith review in a reasonable time of the borrower's calculations and supporting documents concerning amounts eligible for loan forgiveness. The borrower shall not receive forgiveness without submitting all required documentation to the lender. So that really, really summarizes what the borrower's responsibilities are and what the lender's responsibilities are. So now to address maybe some of the concerns that are on your mind. If I were in your shoes, one of my concerns might be kind of the fear of the unknown. What else might change? What do I not know? That's always a haunting feeling. What is it that you don't know? So I would encourage you, People's Bank, we're trying to do a weekly post to our website with updated information. Whether you got your loan through us or not, you can go to our website and access that information. The other concern I want to address is this onerous application, and you're going to hear people talking about it. There are a number of accounting firms and other related businesses that are developing tools that are starting to come to market, so to speak, to help make this process easier. And the bank is certainly looking at some of those tools. In essence, if we find the right tools and we're able to implement them in a way, I think we can make this process much easier for our customers. So we are, we've been in a real uncomfortable hold pattern because we knew these changes were taking place and were likely to occur, and consequently the tools that have been released to help with the forgiveness we knew would then have to be modified. And we also wanted to see who might be the later those that come to the market late with products that might be some really great products for us to consider in trying to make the process easier for our borrowers. So, so with regards to the owner's application, we're hoping, one, that there will be some tools that will be made available that will make the process easier. And number two, we're holding on to that shred of hope that maybe they will come up with a much simpler application for loans under a certain dollar amount. The other thing I want to address is there's a lot of verbiage in this initial guidance that speaks to the SBA's right to, in essence, audit any borrower. And they have, I can't recall the timeline. I would like to encourage that you not be too concerned about that. If you followed the spirit of the program when you made application, and if you've kept records as to how you have spent your funds, and you complete the application with a good faith effort, and that you provide supporting documentation, I believe that the probability of a denial is just incredibly small, number one. I mean, almost non-existent, because if you can prove that you spent the money in these qualified categories, then it's forgiven. It's just that simple. The concern that you might have about providing all of the documentation, I think when we actually drill it down and provide tools, I think that we're going to be able to help with making that easier than it might look like on the face of it. So that's sort of what I had to present, and I hope that I've hit some of the areas of interest for you. So be happy to take questions.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, I do have questions from everyone. So let's see. And to remind everybody, I'm recording this, and so I'll share that on to everyone, so you can share it around. Are we required to rehire the employees that were laid off prior to the CARES Act PPP loan to receive full forgiveness?
They were laid off. When were they laid off?
Prior. Yeah, go ahead.
Do you want me to just clarify? Yeah. We had some people that volunteered to be laid off at the very beginning of this for various reasons. And then after they laid off, the CARES Act was passed and we applied for the loan. When we applied for the loan, we did not count them in as our FTE, but they were laid off after March or February 15th. They were within that time frame.
So it was in the safe harbor period?
Is that, yeah, I guess so.
So it's real interesting because this is also a little bit different twist than what I thought we were going to be looking at. When it comes to your FTE calculation, you're going to have an opportunity to look back to any one of 3 different periods to compare your FTE count for the covered period versus your reference, what they call the reference period.
Right.
And so I won't necessarily go into that now, but I can certainly email you separately and give you those specific date parameters that they provide. And what you do is in each of these 3 different brackets, you choose one and you calculate your average monthly FTE.
Okay.
Your requirement is to meet that FTE count during your covered period, or you have the safe harbor to do that by June 30th.
Okay. So if we don't rehire that person, as long as we're within that average, we should be okay. Okay. Yeah. I think we are within that average. We had our accountant look at that and she felt we were compliant, but I just keep seeing this February or June 30th deadline to restore your FTE. And I didn't know if that was specific to people that were laid off prior, but anyway, thank you.
Okay. Hank, I see your hand is up. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Julia, my question is, when we prepared the application, there was that question about, due to the economic uncertainty, do you believe that your company needs this? And that became a nationwide question of how do we answer that if they're, what are the rules for answering that? And then later there was, if your loan's less than $2 million, we assume you did that in good faith. Are there any more gotcha questions like that in the certifications we have to make where there isn't enough information to actually be able to answer it?
No, Hank, I don't believe so. I believe that is sort of the one big gotcha question. It's interesting, again, in the guidance, it talks about how the SBA has the opportunity to challenge whether or not the borrower sufficiently substantiated their need for the COVID relief funds. And that verbiage is really no more clear than as it was stated in the application. So there appears to be some gray area there, and I think to be honest with you, I think for those borrowers that got funds for loans less than 2 million, the probability that the SBA is going to be looking into it is very, very slim. But I do think that you need to be prepared to say, this is where the economic uncertainty caused us to need the funds. And it's a broad spectrum as to how certain businesses interpreted that. So
we're okay to do that, and thank you. So that it remains uncertain. What I wonder is, whether under generally accepted accounting principles, that has to be recorded as a liability until, even though it's forgiven, until the audit period is over.
now that question, Hank, I can't answer. That would surprise me, but I don't know. I don't know the answer. Sorry.
But I think you're right, Hank. It's a loan until it's forgiven, at the low interest rate, but it's still a loan that we took.
Right. I'm just worried that if they say, well, we can come back over the next 7 years and audit you, and if we do, we can turn over the forgiveness, then you have a liability.
Yeah, I don't know. No way, man. Once it's forgiven, that's it. Okay. Those of you that are new to our process of doing E2E meetings online, if you do have a question, you can post it into the group chat or raise your hand like Hank did, and that lets me know that you'd like to ask a question. Okay, moving on, we have a question. Please talk about documentation requirements for the new hires, temporary workers, and terminations. Do you know of any examples of the documentation that would be required that's in that form, I guess?
Well, part of that is spoken to. I had mentioned that in the application, there's the Schedule A, and then there's a worksheet for Schedule A. And that worksheet for Schedule A has embedded tables. And the tables guide you through that process of determining your FTE count as well, because you list every single employee, and I'm going to pull it up real quick so that I can speak specifically. But that is one tool. The other is when you talk about let me go to that table. I'm sorry for the delay, you guys. So for example, there's a table for employees, and it's the employee name. You have to provide the last 4 digits of their social security number. You have to there's a column for their cash compensation, and then their average FTE. So if they're a full-time employee, then it's just 1. If they're a half-time employee, it's 0.5. Pretty straightforward. And then a column for any salary or wage reduction. You do that for every single employee, and then you total it. That pulls over then to your Schedule A, and it determines whether or not you've had a reduction in FTE and or a reduction in salaries that will reduce your forgiveness amount. Now that's a tool to capture the information. The additional information that you would have to provide as part of your application process to support those payroll numbers include quite a bit. I hate to say that, but tax forms, your 941s that you provided when you made application, payment receipts, canceled checks, account statements documenting the amount of any employer contributions to the employee health insurance and retirement plans. For your FTE, you have to provide a log that shows the average number of your FTE employees. I told you there were 3 look back periods, reference periods that you could use. So you have to provide that information for all of your employees during whatever reference period you choose. And then you compare that then to this table that you just completed for your existing FTE, for your existing employees. So that's the documentation on the FTE and the payroll side, and the tools that you can use to help determine your numbers. Did that answer your question?
The person that asked that, does that answer your question? It worked for me.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you very much. Part of what I was wondering was, would we, for like the new hires, would we need to keep any job announcements? Would we need to report and provide reasons for terminations and the like?
It certainly wouldn't hurt. During this time, especially with the sensitivity of the FTE count, I would retain any records that you have showing your full good faith effort to replenish your employees. That is, after all, the spirit of the program.
Okay, Hank, you had another question?
Well, I just want to add, we run our payroll through ADP, and ADP has informed us that they're going to provide all these reports in the format that's just going to slide into this application and then feed into that summary page. And so if you use other sources, you might want to talk to them about this, because I think they want to be competitive, and they have all this information. It's just a matter of formatting it so that, given the dates we give them, so that we can file it. So it could significantly ease the process, both for us and the bank, because it'll be standardized.
Yeah, that's a great point, Hank. I appreciate that. QuickBooks is doing the same thing. So at least they're saying that they're going to do that. When we actually see and go through the process, we'll find out.
And I want to say thank you, Hank, for mentioning that, because remember, I read what our responsibility is to do a good faith review in a reasonable period of time. Same verbiage that was our role when we reviewed applications for loans. Same verbiage is being used for our responsibility in reviewing requests for forgiveness. And in all instances, it makes reference that if we get a payroll report from a third-party provider, such as ADP, a quick review of that report, and we're good to go to move on to the next part of the application for forgiveness.
Is there any guidance on how soon we're expected to file for forgiveness after our 24-week window ends, or when we run out of funds?
You know, there isn't, and that's kind of interesting, because as the loans currently stand, you're going to start making payments 6 months after you had received the funds. But there's nothing to say that you have to submit for forgiveness prior to that. In fact, there's a specific stipulation that if the forgiveness is completed and it is for an amount in excess of the current principal balance of the loan with the bank, meaning, in other words, the borrower has made some payments, we, the bank, have to be sure to remit back to the borrower any principal payments they've made. So that too seems to suggest that there's really not a defined time frame in which you have to submit for forgiveness.
I'm going to do mine early.
Well, I can just see that if the bank gets 60 days and SBA gets 90 and they used all that, that'd be 5 months. If you just took a month to prepare your thing, you'd probably be at 6 months. So if you don't do it right away, potentially you could start having to make loan payments while it's still being processed.
That's exactly right, Hank. And certainly it is our hope at the bank not to take 60 days, but we've done 900 loans. And so depending upon how those come in for forgiveness, that it's going to be the volume that's going to determine our turnaround time more than anything, especially if we can find some tools that we can use to help the process on our end. But on the flip side of that, I wouldn't be at all surprised that the SBA doesn't take every bit of 90 days. So.
Okay. Question. Thank you, Julia. Any idea on the loan amount for simplification that the feds are looking into to override the SBA's form? You said there was a tier. Is there any guidance on that? Is it a $100,000 loan or a $1 million loan?
No, there isn't a dollar amount. The SBA has said that as long as the information is received in a format similar to the application package that they've prepared, that it's acceptable. So I don't know of any dollar amount that comes into play on that.
Okay, but you were, because you said earlier on that the feds were looking to simplify it based on some tier.
Oh, no. Well, I said that there's a shred of hope
Yeah.
that the U.S. Treasury will prevail upon the SBA to say we need a much simpler application.
Okay.
But I want to be real clear that there has been a lot of push for that, but there has been nothing formal that we have heard from any government body that it is under serious consideration. What we do know is that there's a lot of pressure being put on them to allow for that. And that's why I call it a shred of hope, because right now it is only that.
Okay. I like that term, the shred of hope.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And Michael had a question. How long are we required to maintain FTE after the loan period expires or loan amount is used? Or is it June 30th?
I believe that's an interesting question. I believe that as long as you have proven that your FTE during your covered period is equal to or greater than your one of whatever reference period you chose, and that was during your covered period, that's what you submit for forgiveness. And once you've gotten your loan forgiven, I don't think there's no requirement that FTE be maintained going forward.
Great, thank you.
Okay, that's all I had for questions in the group chat. Anyone else have any questions for Julia? Hearing or seeing none? Cynthia, you want to wrap it up? Maybe let everybody know who you are.
Oh, right. Hi, I'm Cynthia Scher. Jim and I and Lindsay Berriman and a few other people have been doing E2E or getting together entrepreneurs for about 3 years now. And so that's what we do. Small, well, not so small. We have a pretty large mailing list of we up to about 130 people or so. And just our objective is to help connect and inform entrepreneurs throughout the Rogue Valley so that we have a sense of community and know where our resources are and who's doing business in who we can call when we have issues around different businesses, and so people start to get to know each other a little bit better. So and People's Bank has been our sponsor. They've since we began and have paid for a lot of pizza and beer. So usually we meet in person and have tours of different people's businesses. I see several of you, we've been at your place. We've been at Quantum, we've been at Derek's. I don't have everybody's face on the screen, but you'll have the opportunity to visit other people's businesses if you like. And when we get back up online, or back up, I shouldn't say we are all online now, when we get back in person. So thanks everybody for coming. Thanks particularly to Julia for giving us your time and your expertise and for sharing what you know about this, what's supposed to be a simple program, but sometimes comes across as kind of complicated.
And Cynthia, Julia's got her hand up. Go ahead, Julia.
Yeah, so Cynthia, I would just say it was a pleasure. I'm happy to do this and I hope it was helpful, but I do want to remind folks that we're going to try to, as I mentioned, at a minimum of weekly, but more often as appropriate, provide information on our website. And I would encourage you to check our website occasionally to see if there's anything recently announced. The interpretation of this, what's it called? The Flexibility Act, the interpretation and then the implementation of that, there could be some other changes or some clarification of what these changes might mean. So please use that as a resource.
Yeah, good reminder. So Julia's presented all the information she has to date, but it is in flux. So you're responsible for checking things out, making sure that everything is current. So great. Well, thanks again for your time, Julia. Really appreciate it, and good to see a lot of familiar and also unfamiliar faces on Zoom. So we'll keep you posted when we have a next E2E update or meeting. Good night.
Bye, everybody. Thank
Bye,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.